Welcome back from the sunshine. Now, some people who chatted to me during the break said that they were booked in to go to a session in either the parish centre or in Carlow College at 12:20. So if you are any of those people, if you probably sit on at an outside or somewhere like that so that you can leave relatively easily and you can move and leave through the back. Now, this session is our first online session, and we're delighted to be, it's being presented by the Glucksman Gallery in Cork City in partnership with Cork County Council. And they're going to talk about the process they developed to encourage young people in imagining the future of Cork City for the Cork City Development Plan. So we have a panel to talk, and you welcome the chair of the session, Dr. Fiona Kearney, and she will introduce all of her panellists. Welcome, Fiona.
Thanks a million. Hello, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here, and thank you so much to the Arts Council for including us, and specifically just to thank Sinead and Emer for their incredible organisation. My panellists are going to take their seat. I just wanted to give a little bit of context about Freedom of the City. The Glucksman, which is the University Contemporary Art Gallery in Cork, has a long kind of tradition of working with young people, and I'm just trying to move ahead my slide here, but it doesn't seem to be working for me, so I'm just wondering if I can get the next slide. Is that possible? Because what I was hoping to show you was an interior shot of our exhibition spaces with an exhibition called Viewpoints that we developed with our colleagues in the School of Law, which was specifically for young people. But of course, as with so many of us during COVID, we didn't and weren't able to open these spaces to the public. And it really kind of created, I suppose, a challenge, but an opportunity for us to work in very, very different ways. The Glucksman has very strong relationships built up with communities and schools across Cork and indeed now the Munster region. And some of those relationships are with young people who are experiencing severe disadvantage, including children who are living in direct provision. And I remember before the pandemic being extraordinarily proud of the fact that one of the young people in a Q&A that we did described the Glucksman as home because it was a place where she could come and express herself. But of course, what does it mean when COVID sent us all home, but your place of residence isn't your home? So we wanted to work very strongly with these young people to create places and spaces where they could still express themselves. And Cork City Council were just the most extraordinary partner in doing that. Very grateful to the Arts Council for funding this work. But Cork City Council took the risks of allowing us to go into public spaces and present at a time when the gallery obviously had to remain closed. And we got more and more ambitious, creating Cork's first kind of asphalt work of art with the artist Fatty Burke. And this linked into a wider discussion around playful spaces. And I'm going to pick up with Denise Cahill, who is the kind of wonderful person who kind of originated this project with us. We'll be speaking with Tadhg Crowley, my colleague, who's from the Glucksman, who's the senior curator, with Alex Pentek, who's one of the 5 wonderful artists who got involved with us in the project, and Fearghal Reidy, who really was the person who just kept saying yes and made it all happen. But because this was essentially a project about enabling young people's voices to be heard and represented within the Cork City Development Plan, I felt it was really important that we would start with their voices. Now, we had over 1,000 submissions, and I'm sure we would have had 1,000 more than delighted children to take the day off and come to visual to present here, but we obviously can't do that. So we're going to just screen a very short film that just outlines the project itself. So if we can go to the film, please.
Freedom of the City was a project by the Glucksman Gallery that invited over 2,000 children to contribute to the Cork City Development Plan. In partnerships with the UCC and Cork City Council, the Glucksman have put together a city-wide creative programme that helped us to express our ideas for healthier, greener and more playful cities. This film tells the story of how that happened.
Freedom of the City has created an opportunity for young people to get involved with Cork City Council and to picture and express how they would like to see their city develop into the future. As a society, it is crucial that we include and listen to the voice of our young people. Their ideas and proposals about Cork's development invite us to consider current planning practices and imagine a positive future for our city. I have been struck by the wonderful vision that they have for Cork, that promotes a living environment built on inclusivity and well-being. We have seen a clear message from the young people of Cork that they want a city that places nature to the fore. This strong emphasis on developing our city to be a shared space with wildlife is presented to us in a variety of fun ways. The consistent message is that a city that prioritises nature and prioritises the health and well-being of its citizens. I'm excited to see how this Cork City Development Plan reflects the innovative ideas of our young citizens.
For the most part, we worked collectively. We had like a sheet in the middle of the table, and we talked about what we like about Cork and what we don't like about Cork, and what we'd like to change or keep the same.
In my picture, I added a ton more trees, because even though in Cork, in most places there's a ton of trees and there's loads of forests, but I feel like towards the centre of the city there could be a lot more greenery and grass.
If I was Lord Mayor of Cork, I would make the streets more colourful and then play music in the streets to make a bit more, a nicer atmosphere.
As a university art museum, we have a very special role to play in connecting the vibrant research that happens here on campus and ensuring that it has a real impact in the city where we live. During spring 2021, primary, second level and third level students had an opportunity to explore, using digital activities online, the creative ideas that they want for their city.
I'd really love to have more spaces for informal learning for young people, like open spaces that you can freely go into and learn new skills and things like that.
We learn lots of things in school, and that's great, but also if we went on more outings and everything to museums and other learning spaces, it might be more of a fun experience and we might want to learn more.
The sort of work we do with young people, I suppose, often revolves around empowering them to have their own voice and have their own say. We work a lot with kids that might be from marginalised communities or minority groups. So the themes of belonging and inclusion come up quite frequently. And then using creativity to help them to express themselves.
So for the Freedom of the City project, we used digital media. The internet is a place where young people feel comfortable. It allows us to reach bigger audiences. Young people can engage from the comfort of their own space.
So the idea with Healthy Cities is that we work in collaboration. We never do anything on our own. Really, the process of how we work together and that collaboration and that growing, I suppose, of expertise across different organisations is really essential for health promotion. Collaboration brings a greater knowledge and understanding of health, and it leads to really positive outcomes. This is a fantastic example of such a collaboration where the expertise is here in the Glucksman in terms of engaging with children. The planning expertise is in the local authority, and then the playful element came through from the playful paradigm. So bringing all of these expertises together has lent itself to this wonderful partnership and fantastic outcomes that we can see here from children, with the schools engaging also, and parents and people at home engaging. So really, in a nutshell, this project, personifies what a Healthy Cities approach is, or a playful approach is to city development planning. And it's been a wonderful experience for us to observe this in practice.
If I was the Mayor of Cork City, I would put more electric car spots for electric cars for the climate.
I want more greener spaces, parks in your cities, cleaner rivers and more rooftop gardening to utilise space.
It'd be nice if there's like cycle lanes so you could cycle to training like safely, so you don't have to drive or anything.
It'll also be better for us if we stop using cars, as well as being better for the environment. We can, do more exercise and it'll be more healthy for us.
Urban planning really is about making places for people, and in that there's so many things underpinning it. There's sustainable development, there's inclusiveness, making sure everybody is part of their city, and also having a say. Participating in the future of your city is so important. But really, mostly we're thinking about making livable places, places that are pleasant to live in, to walk around, to cycle around, nice places to go to work. Really a good city is a place that people want to be and not that they have to be.
I feel like aside from the art, a thing that the city would really need to implement is like more laws on litter, or more like community-run events about cleaning the city and cleaning the beaches, because it's like really impactful on not only our health but also the planet's health.
If we kind of just ignore it, sure, it won't be a nice place to live at all. But if we actually make impact on what's happening, we have to think, oh yeah, there's pollution everywhere, we need to really fix this. If we actually had a good mindset towards all of this, it would be such a nice city in a couple of years.
The drawings are just incredibly compassionate, and when you step away and it really gives you perspective to get into the mind of a child, because sometimes you forget what it's like to be 8, 9 and 10, and to be able to look into their minds and look at the creativity is something that really gives you hope, and that we should be listening to our young people and making the right decisions today in order to have a better future tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm really struck by the amount of colour in the images, and how actually they've referenced colour, that they really want colourful buildings, and that just shows that kids are, they're perceiving their environment and they want fun, and they want variety, and they want something interesting and something exciting.
If I was Lord Mayor of Cork, I'd make the river cleaner, we'd have better advantage of it, so we'd be able to play in it more, and there'd be lots of trees and bushes and green areas. I'd also make it a better place to learn and play, and add learning stations around Cork where you could learn a bit about the history of Cork, or you could just learn some fun facts or stuff like that.
If there's less travelling and there's less cars on the road, it would be a safer space, there would be less pollution, and it would also be a lot quieter.
If I was Lord Mayor of Cork, I would put more areas of greenery and places for people to relax.
If I was Lord Mayor for today, I'd like to make the city more inclusive for people with physical disabilities.
I'd have little parks where you can just kind of sit back and relax instead of all the loudness, and it'd have fairy lights and music, nice soft music constantly playing.
Well, the voice of young people is vital in terms of catering for their needs and what they'd like to see happening with the city. So they're the future, and their voice is really important, and it's also sort of written into the legislation that we hear from children and their voices in what they would like to see happening with the city. Also, I suppose, from looking at some of the pictures that they've drawn up, they really do have a great contribution to make, and they're very aware of the main issues affecting their city, such as the environment, parks and public spaces.
Essentially, the development plan will be the indicator or the guide for growth for Cork City over the next 6 years, but it takes a longer time framework right up to 2040. They're not going to be children, 5-year-old children or 10-year-old children who are going to read 700 pages and give us an informed written submission. It's never going to happen. But I think this allows us to quite clearly see what young people want. And if we step back as adults and look at what they're asking for, it'd be pretty cool that in 19 years' time, when they're all adults, that they've influenced Cork City to be better for young people.
So a huge thank you really to the young people who this is all about. And I think one of the reasons that we're kind of on the stage today is to talk also a little bit about the kind of challenges and methodologies and processes about how to make a project like this happen. And really, I'm going to start with Denise, because the Playful Cities paradigm that you mentioned in the film was kind of really the kind of touchstone reference point where we began. So maybe you might explain a little bit about that to the audience.
Sure. So my role is I'm the Healthy Cities Coordinator for Cork, and I'm employed in probably one of the biggest bureaucratic organisations in the country, the HSE. But my role, I suppose, is to bring about collaborations in as much as possible towards health. And I think the best way to describe that, you know, it came from a graphic harvester actually at an event once. She drew my role as that of a honeybee, where my role is to cross-pollinate and to try and bring the expertise of different people together for better benefit. So we were really lucky in Cork. We were given the opportunity to participate in an URBACT European project, and the idea of it was that Cork would follow the good practice of the city of Udine in Italy, which really is all about play, and Italian cities in general are very much child-centred and playful in their approach. And Udine was the lead city, and Cork got to be one of 6 other cities across Europe that got to, I suppose, replicate how they do it, but put a Cork flavour on it. So we really, I suppose, embraced that, because for me, in terms of healthy cities, play was a great lever for us to look at health, but also to bring in planning and city and urban context. So we were delighted to participate in that, and we used that opportunity, I suppose, to break out of the shackles of the bureaucracy. And I suppose I think the thing that holds people back the most in terms of public sector working is a fear of getting things wrong or a fear of criticism. But because we had this permission with this European project to try things out, it just gave us courage to do things differently, and space to get it wrong. And I think that's really crucial in terms of interagency collaboration. And kind of, as somebody said this morning, stepping out of your own professional boundaries and not thinking you're the expert in everything. Because these types of issues such as climate change and health and, I suppose, urban development are quite complex, and they require the multitude of views. So we were delighted to participate. We trialled a few different ways of being playful in the city, and if you can think back to 3 years ago, before the dreaded C word came to Ireland and came, I suppose, across the world, we were quite an indoor culture here in Ireland. You know, the pub culture really dominates here, and people are indoors quite a bit, and play can be indoors, and play can be very much in playgrounds, caged off facilities in our parks. And it's like as if we've decided that children need to play in certain places, and we're defining it for them. So our idea was to make the city playful and to try and bring play out of the playground, not just to have it in the playground. So we trialled that in one particular space on the marina in Blackrock over 4 Sundays. And we didn't say we were closing the road, which is, you know, the terminology you use when you stop cars coming through a space. We said we were opening it to play. But we did close the road to traffic. So it just brought, I suppose, a different approach to that space. And I suppose we learned by default that we were doing placemaking. We were transforming the space into something for children and families and older people and people in wheelchairs and people on bikes and scooters with limited ability, that we were giving them permission to play in an open space. Now that was hugely successful, and there was movements then in City Council. They saw the benefit of this pedestrianisation, and there was a movement both at executive level and at councillor level to permanently pedestrianise that space, and that space is pedestrianised now. And, you know, as a result, I think there's a confidence in Cork now to do more pedestrianisation. So the playful approach kind of, I feel, was something that helped that to happen. So we've done multiple projects across the city, and we gained confidence from that, I think. And I suppose because we're really committed in terms of healthy cities to the engagement with all people in city development planning, with health being, I suppose, our focus, we really felt we'd like to support something with children. And you know, we're not the experts in that. The Playful Paradigm might have been experts, say, in play, or we were developing our expertise or our knowledge around play. But we were reaching out, I suppose, to see who else could do it. And I suppose that's where, you know, the doors started opening, and City Council were really open to this and really wanted to meaningfully engage with children. And the Glucksman and the artists in the Glucksman had that expertise. So that collaboration came very nicely out of the Playful Cities as a result.
Yeah, and we assembled a multidisciplinary team, and I should say, this is actually the first time the 5 of us have all been together. We have a number of other colleagues, including Hugh, who spoke at the end there, who's in your planning department, but also our colleagues in UCC from the M Plan and some of the students that you saw. And it was, as you said, I think having those different kind of expertises all around the table enabled us to put together this kind of worksheet. And we had a lot of discussion again on Zoom around getting the right questions. And maybe, Denise, you can speak to that, because we led with this idea of, you know, that the city can confer a freedom of the city, that is its greatest honour. But we knew that the Lord Mayor was what the younger children would identify with, kind of homework off and kind of, you know, something that was, so that was the key question. But on the back of the sheet, we had this much more kind of detailed analysis that really produced the data that ultimately went into the submission. So I've shared that, but do you want to speak a little bit to that?
I think that's the important thing. I think what Hugh said was actually very valuable. You know, no child, in fact, possibly no adult, is going to read 400 pages of a proposal for a city development plan. They're going to maybe hone in on certain sections. But what this process brought about was we were looking at the themes of the city development plan, but we wanted to frame it in a way that was child-centred. And there is a lot of expertise, I suppose, in terms of in UCC around that, in terms of the planning department. But obviously the planning department in Cork City Council know their themes and know what way they were going with the city development plan in terms of the overall. So coming together, we had the expertise of people who engage with children, but also the planners, and then, of course, the creative expertise of the Glucksman. And together we framed the structure of how to engage with children and how to do it in a meaningful way, not in a tokenistic tick box way. This is a really meaningful process. And as Fiona said, we never got to meet in person. It was all online, and we knew that we had hoped that we'd get, you know, that the children would be able to come in and meet us in person during the process, but it all had to be done in a virtual way. So that was even more important, that it was meaningful. And I think we brought that to a full 360 degree, you know, because the analysis took the same approach. It took that thematic approach as well in the end. So it was a great approach.
Yeah. And I remember from the discussions that we had on the Zoom, really different people were contributing different elements of the question. Like there was a strong sense that we knew that climate action was something that was of real concern to the young people and that we needed to pull that out and give it its own section. But I also remember feeling particularly proud that we had the thing that described the changes you have made to Cork in your picture, because again, for some of the really young children, even language wasn't going to be possible. Yeah. So it was about what they could see in the picture. And I remember one image particularly struck me because it was, you know, kind of a lovely, almost abstract drawing, but on the back, written by the carer of a young child with Down syndrome, it was, "This represents his desire for more toilets in public parks that are accessible." I was just like, boom, that has to go into the submission. So these kind of very real needs being communicated in suddenly kind of very different ways. So we had the sheets. We had hoped Tadhg to go out into kind of by giving workshops into schools and by bringing the children, I suppose, essentially back into the museum. Our aim is always to have them experience the Glucksman. And you might just speak a little bit, I suppose, just about the context of that work.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Fiona says, our main aim is to bring people into the museum and to give them joyful or exciting or challenging experiences with contemporary art, but also to bring them into the university setting and to expose them to the surroundings of a university and to a third level education. And so when we initiated our school projects way back, I think about 7 years ago now, these large scale school projects, it was always about bringing schools and students on site for facilitated workshops to work with our artists, with our educators, and then to respond to quite urgent themes. So if that's whether it's around place or identity or the environment or the future, and then crucially to give them, I suppose, a space within the museum in terms of actually between our exhibitions, to give them that moment to actually take over our main gallery spaces and to add that bit of prestige to their work and to give them, I suppose, that kind of the carrot or the kind of significance to come to participate and do part of projects. And so as the years went by, the number of participants grew and our network of teachers and schools grew. And so we were really in a good place when it arrived at the Freedom of the City project, because we had developed that network and trust with teachers across primary and secondary level. And that extended beyond the city boundary, but this was, I suppose, a project that was specific to the city. And we were able to we identified and worked with 50 schools within the city boundary, new city boundary, which covered schools across, I suppose, the different regions and across DEIS schools and different social backgrounds. So we were keen that there was really a broad and democratic voice that came through. And I know I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to have to mention COVID, because it did, I suppose, as we go back to that moment in the lead up to Christmas of Christmas 2020, that we were still really hopeful that we'd be able to bring the students on site into the museum and facilitate workshops where they would respond to the questions that we were designing, and to work with artists to create artworks or create their own pieces that would go on display. So that was the model we were still planning. But as things kind of unfolded, we began to realize that that wasn't going to be possible and we'd have to shift our focus. But I suppose wherever there's a challenge, there's also an opportunity. And the opportunity here was to work with some incredible artists, including Alex to my left, Fiona Kelly, Shane O'Driscoll, Ciara Rogers, and Claire Collin and Helen O'Keefe, who go under the name Splattervan. And we, I suppose, throughout all of our programming, we were really keen that we work with artists who are to the fore in terms of their practice, really established, maybe not so much just always established, but really, I suppose, critical, developing a critical contemporary practice, and one that we are really interested in, and that we feel it's important to expose to audiences. So with the opportunity here, with working with schools, there was an opportunity to present these artists as people, which is kind of, I suppose, about demystifying what an artist is, but also presenting their practice to the young people, and to learn skills from them. So we developed a set of tutorial videos, a set of resources for teachers that they could use in a classroom setting to learn from people like Alex about certain techniques that could easily be replicable. And I suppose one of the reasons we chose these artists as well, because, for instance, in Alex's case, he works in the public realm. Shane O'Driscoll is a street artist who also works in the public realm. So it's about choosing artists that we feel were relevant in terms of when you're looking at a city. And Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm wandering off.
No, I think that was really important, that idea that, you know, each of the artists had very, very different practices so that the educators could kind of select from different models, but they were equally ambitious. And I think Shane is, this is the kind of website page where you could go and click on the video and you could download a set of instructions, which you might speak to that kind of in terms of what the educators had as a set of resources in the classroom.
Absolutely. So I suppose going back again to that moment, and there was a lot of sense of kind of the unknown, a lot of stress. It was, and like knowing teachers in our network and speaking to them, that actually there was so much that they were trying to take on. We were keen, we didn't want to overburden them, and by, you know, layering a project on top that might actually seem like extra work. So it really was about, in terms of the worksheets, in terms of the templates, in terms of these tutorial videos, was really about saying, actually, this is really easy to participate in. You can do as much or as little as you want, but we really want to hear the views of the children. So some educators went on walks around the city in terms of gathering research before they went back, and then watched the tutorials and made the artworks and did the whole lot. And others just, I suppose, gave students the opportunity, the time within the class day to find their own way to kind of respond. So it was about that flexibility that we were really keen on, that would include, and I suppose that's the reason we got to over 2,000 young people contributing, was the fact that it was such a flexible model that was seen as an opportunity by educators rather than a burden.
Yeah. And those worksheets, myself and Tadhg went out and literally delivered those to the kind of primary and secondary schools around Cork, because it was, again, in that time when we were locked down. And we really didn't know, because we were delivering them as empty sheets, thinking maybe we'll get a few back, maybe the school might send one or two. And so it was absolutely extraordinary to have this just incredible sense of participation and engagement, I think. And it does speak, we were talking about this, about the kind of trusted relationships that you've built up, so that in this moment of risk, they kind of still knew, yeah, exactly, they could kind of pace themselves. So I think that was really important. But another element that was really important was, of course, the kind of really fantastic artists that we had, and how exciting it was for the schools to engage with people whose practices they might be familiar with, more as potentially a Leaving Cert question or as an artwork that they know in the city. And because every single artist that we asked said yes and agreed to come and do the film themselves, it did make it very personal. And again, something that if we were delivering the workshops, we might have had to work with Shane or Fiona, but Shane and Fiona couldn't have come in and delivered all the workshops. So it was a very interesting learning for us. And I'm thrilled that the artist Alex Fentek is here, and he designed the section on playful spaces. And one of the reasons that we were so keen to have Alex involved in this particular project was because he is one of the most distinguished artists in Ireland, working at an incredibly large scale within the public realm. And I think many of you will know this extraordinary work that he has done in Middleton, Kindred Spirits, but it's one of the most beloved public artworks in Cork. And I think to give children an opportunity to meet Alex, even virtually, was extraordinary. So Alex, thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of the project. I'd love you to talk a little bit about the ambition of your public artwork, because that was something that we wanted to communicate, and then we'll talk about the playful bit. But
sure, thanks a million, Fiona. Very generous. So, working in the public realm, in context of urban spaces in particular, actually it's contexts, and so urban is a word that has multiple meanings, doesn't it? You know, there are multiple types of urban space. And so I've worked, you know, in Australia, in US, in Canada. This is a piece in Washington, DC, cited last year, and in Northern Ireland and across Ireland as well. I think where I come from with the public realm is to try to create some sort of disruption, and to work with some ideas that Hannah Arendt discusses in her writings, who's an amazing theorist, post-war theorist, where she talks about the public realm and public sphere as a discursive space, as an agonistic space, and as a space where we can find voice. And that through voice in particular, our voices, to have expression through our voices, and to then find our own identity. And she says that we have to find our identity first before we can use our voices to actually say something, to protest about something, or to make some sort of a statement. So I think there's a massive potential within the public sphere and working in the public realm to create those spaces for people to interact with. And the reason why I love sculpture in particular, and well, that's my medium, is because, like architecture, we have to negotiate sculpture in space. We have to either walk through it or around it, or like the amazing Tom de Puer exhibition here, you know, we have to negotiate those spaces. And so this is a very primal level almost of engaging with people. And so it's very exciting. It's a challenging sometimes sphere to work in. So one particular project actually that I could just talk about was a piece last year, Discord, which was a sort of intervention. Here's an image of that actually here. So this happened, it was a collaborative project with musician Larissa O'Grady, who plays with Crash Ensemble. And then she asked a colleague and friend of hers, who you can see here sitting in the foreground, Sam Perkin, who's a composer with Crash Ensemble as well, and he's based between Lyon and France. And so we decided we'd do something. We had no money, but we said, look, we can definitely make something happen between some sort of interactive sculptural space, sound, performative thing. And then came up this this bursary award through Dublin City Arts Office. It was Dublin City Live Festival, and we put in a proposal. So we came up with this idea that was essentially a folding structure. And you know, there's mention of lockdown already just now and earlier in other talks today. Like basically, this is a period where we were just coming out of lockdown. So there's almost a hesitative celebration feeling to the thing, but also there's great mixture of sadness as well. And we were thinking, who are the one of the most effective groups of this? And it was young people, teenagers, and even within that group, there's even a more marginalized group, and that would be the skate community. And Sam is actually a renowned skater. He doesn't skate anymore with a knee injury, but he's a legend, and has a large YouTube following and has influenced many people. So he's part of this community. And so we decided we'd do something for the skaters that would incorporate skating in the work. So this, you can see, is a folding structure, and it's almost slightly reminiscent of a mask, but just a barrier or wall that's collapsing and coming down and ending and finishing. So it's lowering to the ground very slowly over about a 5-minute performance in total, or a bit longer. During which time Sam composed an amazing piece of work, which was actually written for violin and skateboard. And here you can see he's actually playing skateboard. And we think that it might actually be the first piece of music ever written for skateboard. We don't know if that's true or not, but we're claiming it as ours anyway. And then Sam contacted the local skate community in Dublin. So this happened in Meeting House Square in Dublin. And you know, very central urban space. And so he got 3 amazing skaters: Michael McMaster, Pete Buckley, and Anthony Thornbury. And they're just gifted. They just make skating look easy. You know, they were gliding over things. And weirdly, I mean, this structure folded down to be this sort of angular shape, and it's made for them to grind off, basically. And we had contact mics on the sculpture while the composition was being played, while they were performing the composition live as well. So the skaters were disrupting this, and basically it was giving it back. It was handing this space back to them. And they said it felt weird, because normally skating in this area sometimes is not allowed. The authorities tell them to move on, or, you know, and there's anti-skating, you know, street furniture, and, you know, sometimes it's kind of not wanted. But this is a group that we wanted to give something back to. So that was what we did with that particular work.
And Alex, you can hear, so you can imagine for the young people who are participating, if they know kindred spirits and they're seeing unity, these are really extraordinary, permanent placemakers, to have an artist who is also being so experimental and playful within space was really important. And in his workshop, I wanted to go back to this slide, Alex, because you are the most expert folder that I know. And in your workshop, you show kind of how to make a little feather and how to do this folding.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it was about kind of a simplicity, this beautiful simplicity of what might be possible, that simple feather could become a permanent sculpture, that this simple fold could become something temporary and meaningful within public space. And I know that you're working with UCC students and doing that now, so it kind of, there is that moment where you can take these tiny little gestures and bring them into the kind of public realm in a meaningful way.
I think what we're talking about now is the joy of materials. Yeah. and this is, I think, this is where you were coming from, I think, with the workshops, and with the whole drive of this to give to young people in particular. So the joy of materials, and artists, we all know this, and we perform research in this direction intuitively, I suppose. But with materials, it's very interesting because, I mean, there was such a feel-good factor to this project. The feedback from the students and from the staff was just off the charts good. And so it felt good to do on the one hand. But also, materials are very interesting because, they say 90% of communication is non-verbal. How we meet someone for the first time, we're judging our body language and, all of these visual cues. And it's exactly the same with materials, that, whether we're, whatever age we are, when we engage with materials, the materials are also communicating to us through these haptic kind of sensory kind of mechanisms that are very difficult to actually pin down. And so I'm a great believer in faith in materials, and so some of the research that you mentioned, working with the Teaching and Learning Department and the new Design Thinking course in UCC with Dr. Bryony Supple and Siobhan O'Neill as well, and we've created a number of workshops working online, and that's the challenge then, to kind of transpose these things to be available online, which is what we've done. And we've actually written a couple of papers on the subject, and we're very excited to have one of our papers featured. I have to read the title of the book. Sorry. So the Bloomsday Handbook of Collaboration in Higher Education, Tales from the Front Line. We're having a chapter in that book coming up soon. Brilliant. And yeah, it's been wonderful.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thank you again, because this kind of central moment of the project really was infused with that kind of sense of making, that sense of play, that sense of participation, even though, as I said, we were still meeting on Zoom. We weren't really able to get into the schools, but there was that tactility, that sense of really, I think, as you said, that process of making that became so important. Now, those works came back to us and we were able to display them. And the reason we wanted to bring them back to have this outcome is because Fearghal Reidy, who's been here since the beginning, and I'm coming to last because it was working towards this idea of a submission for the Cork City Development Plan that was kind of driving us forward. And I just want to say, you were very open to this kind of quite madcap group of people who were whizzing around you. And you generally, I have to say, the sense is maybe a lot more caution. You were so superbly open, and then not only just in terms of facilitating and funding the project, but looking to open your whole team. And so maybe you can speak about that, because in terms of the wider sense of the development plan, to look at people like Hugh being involved and giving his time, and that kind of sense of participation from the council was really quite extraordinary.
Well, thanks for the kind remarks.
You could tell me that.
I couldn't imagine doing it any other way. A development plan is like putting, you're on a train track and there's stops on the way, and you have to make the stops and they have to be timed, and it's highly regulated. And so many people will make very slick submissions, spend a lot of money on submissions, or you will have specific interest groups who will make a lot of submissions. And we were very conscious that a development plan isn't just about land use zoning or cycleways, and in the cases of some local authorities, wind turbines comes up an awful lot. But there's so much more in a development plan that it was very important for us to consult as broadly as possible. The issue was we didn't know how. And we did the standard things of webinars, looking at international experience, another one about Cork. Then we did surveys, and we tried to divide the surveys into age categories so that we understood the priorities of each age. And still, it's pretty dry. So once the opportunity came and the call came, I said, yes, this is exactly what we need to do. It just really gets so many things going in terms of engaging with younger people, because as you said in the video, it's their future. So in 6 years' time, the 10-year-old will be 16 and the 16-year-old will be 22, you know, and it will be their city that we're talking about. The second thing is that it brought the conversation home, you know, so it's not just in the school, but when children go home, what are you doing? Why do you think you'll be the Lord Mayor and get freedom in the city? Well, I've been asked, you know. And the Lord Mayor was kind enough to come in behind it as well, which was very important, and encourage children to participate. So that was very important. And when you read the submission, and unfortunately it's one submission, it's not 2,000 submissions, which is in fact what it is. But when you read the submission, it's a very human submission, and that's very important and often lost in a development plan process. Because, as you saw by the video, you know, there are very practical things that we need to look at. There's also just the life and soul of the city, and how that is, how children see that now, and how it can be improved for the future. And that's extremely valuable. And I would say, having watched the video a few times now, that it should be compulsory viewing for all the other people making submissions, because, you know, and it might be a bit controversial, but a lot of people making submissions are either echo chambers of their own cause, or dinosaurs who want this, that, or the other to be zoned. And they should just match sticks in their eyes and force them to watch the video if they're not going to read the submission. And I mean that. I think there's one core issue in terms of, if you look at it, and this isn't a criticism of Cork City Council or the councillors, but the management and the elected members of Cork City Council are a pretty homogenous team. You know, we're all over a certain age, we're all white, and that's not right. And it's not right to have that echo chamber and listen to ourselves and come up with, look in our hearts and see what is right for the future of the city. So we went out of our way to engage with healthy cities, and very good submissions from the healthy cities. And with the PPN, we gave the PPN tools so that they could consult and more submissions come back, with age-friendly, with LGBT, with as broad a church of stakeholders as we can. And I'd like to say that the most valuable one in terms of, as I said, humanity in the process was this one, because it's so practical and yet so forward-looking. And it's exactly the type of city I think that everybody would like to live in ultimately. You know, the active travel, the sustainable development, the green, the playfulness, the museums, education. That's heartening that important things like that came up to the fore as well. One anecdote though was, sorry, block your ears now, it's Healthy City, but you know, there was one I think that said, no more McDonald's, we want Dinos instead. So that, you know, and that again just speaks to the human nature of it. So I think it was a very valuable process. We also engaged with young social innovators to engage with the older age groups as well. And we need to find more innovative approaches to making sure that everybody feels part of either a city development plan, which is a fundamental plan for the city, or any other plans that a local authority or any other state agency is preparing. You often, when you read plans, you can see people emerge from them. You can say, oh, I know such and such a body probably wrote that section, and somebody else wrote that section. And no offence, but Denise, I recognise your writing at this stage, and it's usually very good and valuable stuff. This was different because it brought across, as I said, humanity and the diversity in a very, very succinct way, which was enabled us then, because of the work in interpreting it, enabled us to make sure that the submission was included in the deliberations. And you see it reflected throughout the plan. The actual contents of the submission you do see throughout the draft plan and now in the amendment stage. What was nice then, I suppose, was that on Culture Night, The art was displayed in City Hall and other venues throughout the city. And we've used the artwork as well to, I suppose, brighten up the plan. Now that's not a superficial thing. We wanted to emphasize this initiative and the participation of children in the plan, so that people reading it, the dinosaurs reading it, if you like, realize that you're reading something for the future of these people. It's for all of us. I mean, it's age-friendly and hopefully reflects the diversity of the city, but it's for the future of this cohort in particular. And that's why you see in the draft plan the imagery, or a selection of the imagery displayed throughout it. It's a reminder, so it's not a superficial, glossy piece.
No, and we really appreciate, I suppose, that kind of very considered attention that indeed the planners made during the kind of selection and evaluation process that went on to become a very formal piece of data analysis. So we had over 2,000 of these sheets back and front, and a team of researchers, which was not just in UCC but in the University of Oxford, came together, led by our colleague Helen Lynch, who is part of this group but isn't with us today. And they spent 2 weeks, over 50 hours, 15 researchers analysing this data to put together the formal submission that went in alongside all the other submissions. But I think when you speak about the humanity, partly it was because they included so many of the actual illustrations, and while they distilled out very clearly those kind of high-level desires that we see expressed around green spaces, around kind of more playful areas within the city, they left in things like, well, we would like 3 trampolines on the pavements, kind of going forward. There were ice cream vans up and down Patrick Street. There was kind of, and it was that those little elements that make you smile, but make you remember what it's like to be a child and want different things. And I think that, for me, was part of the kind of real success of the project, was that it reminded us how hopeful you can be at that age, and how you don't see so many barriers to why things can be done. You just expect those trampolines to appear. So over to you there, Cork City Council.
No problem. I can just see the insurers going mad.
No, exactly.
We'd love to do it.
We have them in the thing. The other thing I want to say was that it did get picked up, and we never thought we'd be retweeted by the Office of the Planning Regulator. But just again, where the reach of the project went was really fascinating. And I suppose one of the reasons we wanted to be here today was to share it as a methodology. And I should acknowledge that the Cork City Arts Office, and Michelle Carew in particular, is using some elements of this for her own consultation now for the Cork Arts Plan. And we were in the wings of the corridor talking about maybe kind of, I won't call it Freedom of the City 2, but Freedom of the City 2, to look at the kind of maybe the more environmental issues that are coming up. So we hope to continue this work, but I would like, with the kind of very short time that's left, to see if there are any questions or queries or things that anyone would like to ask. We have 2 people with mics, so if you would like to ask a question, please put up your hand, and if you could speak into the mic so that the people that are tuning in online could hear any questions. So I don't know if we've anyone that would like to ask a question of the panel. It's hard for me to see. Yeah, I have one there. If you wouldn't mind going up, thanks. It's Louise, is it? Great.
Hi, thanks Fiona. Louise Dondon from the Lime Tree Theatre and Bell Table. It's absolutely inspiring. I'm just blown away by the presentations from everybody here, and I just want to congratulate you all on an amazing project. So I'm just wondering how you funded it all.
It's such an important question, and I was just speaking with Fergus beforehand. So it was funded in 2 very different ways. Absolutely by the Cork City Council, who came behind the idea of the workshops, but also in terms of the Glucksman and the time and the kind of much words, was funded by the Arts Council. And that was because money that we were meant to be spending on our front-facing programme wasn't going to happen, and we were allowed and enabled to redirect those resources to fund these other programmes that we wanted to do. And that was really, really important, that kind of trust that was put in us by the Arts Council. And then with the City Council, we were able to produce like these physical things. We were able to, commission the digital. I mean, there was just so many things we didn't think I think we had to keep revising with the City Council. We were like, and now we have to do this and not this. But at every stage, there was just such support and trust. For me, trust was so important, that we could all play our parts. And, Equally, that research piece was funded by the university. And that is a very expensive, important piece. So I don't want to minimise how challenging it was. We're all relieved now because we're on the other side of it. We're very happy. It was very challenging in the time and challenging because of COVID. But we were driven by, you know, as Alex was saying, that kind of sense of wanting to ensure that young people could have something in that time. And if you remember, they were only in school. They were, you know, that was one of the few places they could come and make and be creative and imagine a future. So it felt really important. But yes, Arts Council, City Council, thank you very much, and UCC for the funding.
Could I just add something, Fiona? We were talking earlier, and just as we were putting on mics, and you mentioned reverse mentoring, which is just a genius idea, you know, of listening to younger people to teach some sort of skill or insight in that reverse role, which I think is brilliant. And I think there's a narrative happening here with this project that goes much broader, and that is, we're talking about young people, but we're also talking about bringing artists from different areas in, you know, to perhaps places where they're not normally engaging.
Yeah.
And this is something really exciting that's happening across the board, I think. And I think what we're talking about is a decentralization of education and pedagogy, and sort of how transdisciplinary approaches are changing, especially in third level as well as down the stream, and it's a very exciting place to be involved. But it just also reminded me of something, a wonderful quote I heard driving one evening in the car, and I'm not sure, it was a quote by Picasso, and he says, to be young, to be really young, takes very, very long time.
Yeah. You have another question, I think, here. Thanks.
Hi there. Yeah, hi. I know we don't have much time, but my questions are quick. I'm wondering, how did you manage the expectations of the young people involved in such a kind of grown process of a county development plan, that what they wished for in their way of looking at life was followed all the way through, and didn't end up by saying, oh God, they talked but they did nothing. And I'm just wondering what the next steps are.
Thanks. Well, that's why that moment of focus was so important. But the film, we screen and cultivate in the 8th cinema, give them that sense of not just themselves being on the screen, but as Fearghal was saying, that this is something that people are going to look at, listen to. But maybe Tadhg can come to you just on the ongoing engagement with, and the sense of pride, I think, in terms of the exhibition.
Yeah, so certainly from the outset, and I suppose that the level of participation was dictated by that influence that was anticipated from young people and from schools. But to be asked to be part of this process was really important. And definitely we got sense that actually there was a sense of, I suppose, privilege for the schools, for young people to be involved. And then we talked to them at that early stage about the process and what would happen in terms of actually not individual submissions, but actually a collective submission. And so they understood the process and they understood what they were contributing towards. And I think that was, from the outset, was clearly shared, and I think it was important. I don't know if that answers.
Can I just say something there? Because Cork is working towards becoming a child-friendly city, was that we had a webinar recently, and Professor Laura Lundy, who is an expert in giving children voice and, you know, letting their voice be central to planning and to, I suppose, policy making, made a really a statement for me that stayed with me since, that, you know, a lot of public sector bodies buy out of going to children because they don't want to be accused of tokenism. She said tokenism is more important than not engaging. So this was definitely not a tokenistic approach, but what I'm saying is we have to try different ways. We can't say, oh, that's just tokenistic, or it'll be seen as tokenistic. We have to be creative, and we have to keep trying to be better at it. And it kind of empowered me, because we can't get disempowered with the fear of tokenism when it comes to engaging children in particular. And I think this was a process that was very important for that. And I just want to finally say, children don't ask for crazy things. There was ice cream vans at Patrick Street, that's not crazy, but don't ask for things that are impossible. It's actually very humbling to look at what children say. They want trees, they wanted green spaces and space to play and be themselves. They shouldn't be difficult things to achieve. They're very low-cost interventions. But beyond what they're asking for, I think the most important thing in this process is that children get heard, so that they know that participating in local decision making, participating in city development planning is meaningful, and you will be heard. That political process and the local authority structures is a good process that we can all be part of, and that to me is the key lesson of this. Even beyond what they were saying was their vision ultimately. But it's a very good question.
I think that's a great place for us to bring the panel to the close. I think with the idea that absolutely one of those children is going to be Lord Mayor someday. And hopefully we can keep enabling and ask them to be involved in those questions. I just want to thank the extraordinary team that are both not in the room but here in the room and made the journey today to Cahill from Cork. Thank you, Denise, Fearghal and Alex, and join giving the applause.
Well, can I say yes? Again, thank you, Tadhg, Alex, Fearghal, Tadhg, Denise. That was out of the mouths of babes and ducklings. To listen to what children are saying, to actually listen to them, and to take it seriously, I think is extraordinary. As you said in your last piece, children can spot a foot a mile away. And it's great to know that there are a lot of young Greta Thunberg, I believe it's pronounced, out there. And she is somebody who certainly knows when she's not being listened to. There are plans that we're going to leave behind, and it's fascinating to hear plans are being made. And thank you very much for the wonderful sculptures. A remarkable. I've been eavesdropping, as you know, on this, and one of the things that keeps on coming home to me in every single session is that people are listening and listening outside their comfort zone. They're listening to people they might not normally listen to, they're taking it seriously, and they're listening to views that aren't consonant with their own. And it just is so impressive and hugely important to hear, and for me it's been very heartwarming. Now, our online audience, we're taking a break, but we'll be back 2 o'clock for the keynote address live from Teagasc, Carlo, and it's by Emmanuel Pratt of the Sweet